This is the start of what I'm sure will become an amazing project that I really can't wait to share with you. I'm refinishing a half-scale cabinet with a miniature dollhouse inside of it. I'm really excited to make all the decor and furniture for the inside. I purchased this cabinet from fellow YouTuber Whitney LaBrie's jam-packed eBay store. Later, I'll show you the extras she sent me. To begin the transformation, I removed the BezPec sticker from the bottom so I can replace it later, and the drawers. I'm completely refinishing every single surface of this cabinet, so I'm starting by removing all of the hardware. I do not want to lose any of these pieces, so I'm putting them in a safe place. This is an unfinished wood cabinet, so I'm coming in with some fine sandpaper to clean it up. There were a couple of rough areas around hardware and some wood filler. I will be painting this cabinet, but to get some really great detail with low effort, I'm using some decorative paper as well. I'll be using some scraps of rose paper I got from this packet of paper from Temu. There's some curvy trim in the area I need to add my paper, so I'm using my Dollar Tree ball stylus and tissue paper to make a pattern. I use my ball stylus quite a bit when I'm making miniatures from scratch, so I do suggest investing in one, but if you don't have one, you can use your finger to press the paper along the wood to make an indent. The tissue paper was a bit flimsy for this task, so maybe use notebook paper or computer paper instead. I don't have very much to work with, so I unfortunately don't have two sections of pattern that can completely mirror one another for each of the doors, but I am placing my pattern as nicely as I can. After deciding on the final position, I cut out my scrap paper to be a bit bigger than the template. Some of my eagle-eyed viewers may notice that I knocked one of the feet off, but I have it right here and I'll replace it later. Since I cut this scrap of paper to be just a little bit bigger than the place I'm filling, I'm using the end of my ball stylus to press it up against the wooden trim to get a better impression. I'm calling on some patience I didn't even know I have, and I'm slowly cutting away the paper so I don't accidentally cut too much. The left cabinet door is looking pretty good with only minor gaps, so when I cut out the right side, I made sure to leave a little bit extra. Any of the gaps you see on the left side of the door is because I initially cut the piece of paper too small, so there was never any paper there to begin with. I got a tighter fit for the right side of the door, so now it's time to cover these drawers. If you'd like your pattern to continue on each of the drawers, you should lay the piece over the drawers while they're in place and cut each corresponding piece. I'm not adding the paper just yet because first I need to paint it with this beautiful celery chalk paint from Waverly. I'm painting the sides and the tops of the drawers as well as the bottom, so if any of these are open at any time, you won't be able to see the raw wood. It's time to paint the cabinet doors, so I'm removing these pieces of paper so I don't have to avoid them while painting. While I was pressing the tissue paper to make pattern pieces, I used a piece of cardstock behind the doors to reinforce it so I wouldn't accidentally push them too far in. To give a more finished, professional appearance, I'm painting the face of the trim as well as the visible inside edge. If we go back to the origin of dollhouses, they started with room boxes and also cabinet houses like this, where you could house an entire dollhouse inside of a cabinet. These were also called baby houses and had glass front cabinet doors to display all the miniatures inside. These were intended for adults, not children, and they weren't for play per se, but more to show off your wealth and to provide education about how a house runs. I'll be completing each room with a lot of detail. With the painting complete, I'm using matte Mod Podge to apply the paper. Mod Podge was created for decoupaging purposes, so it's perfect for this, although if you use too much, it can bubble your paper, so use a light hand. I'm pressing the paper firmly to make sure it's attached. Just like the paper pieces I cut for the cabinet door insets, I left a little bit of excess so I can trim it to size to get a nice clean fit. I'm using some pretty enormous scissors to cut most of the excess off and finishing with some fine grade sandpaper. I'm using the sandpaper on the very edge going in one direction, making sure not to remove any of the surface paper, but only at the very edge so I get a nice clean cut. You could also use an emery board. I really love the pattern of this paper, but the mauve and pink tones don't necessarily match the celery green chalk paint I used, so I'm doing a little trick. To make the paper coordinate with the cabinet color, I'm coming in with a tiny paintbrush and some of the paint I used on the cabinet to add some details to the leaves. Rather than completely painting each of the leaves, I'm using the original mauve color as a shadow. Now this paper coordinates with the cabinet color and it actually has some more dimension and interest. You can also use this trick on fabric. I've used both paint and markers. To compare the before and after, the new painted pieces are on the top. I did the same thing for the paper on the doors. It's probably a crafting circle fact that rub and buff makes everything better. To highlight the carving on the cabinet, I'm using some gold leaf rub and buff on a small paintbrush that I don't care about ruining. I'm carefully applying the rub and buff to the surface of this piece of trim and the inside edge. I'm doing the best I can to stay within the lines and coming back in with the original cabinet color to clean up any mistakes. Rub and buff is a pretty thick wax, so it was hard to control with longer bristles, so I trimmed them very short and now I'm rubbing the paint onto the surface. I really love rub and buff because it gives a very realistic metallic luster in just one quick coat. It also dries almost immediately. I'm using the gold as a few key highlights, making sure not to overdo it. With the painting and the rub and buff done, I'm adding my pieces of paper. You may have noticed I left some excess gold around the outer edge of the inside of the cabinet door. If there are any gaps in my paper, I want this gold to be visible rather than the original wood color. I added a layer of matte Mod Podge and I'm using a clean brush to press the paper into place. I already love how this is looking, so this part was freaking scary, but I'm adding a layer of clear wax over the entire cabinet, including the paper. This product is from Waverly and it's a bit new to me, so I'm not 100% sure how to use it. I'm adding this layer of clear wax as a protective layer because I'll be aging this with some antique wax and I don't want it to be too dark. To mute the Waverly antique wax a bit more without adding any water, I'm using some of the clear wax. I'm starting by making some tiny timid strokes on the side of the cabinet, but then I eventually cover the entire thing and wipe away the excess with a paper towel. I let the layer of clear wax dry overnight so it adds the protective coat so less of this dark color seeps into the paint. Some of you may prefer the cleaner look of the original paint color, but I really want this to look like an aged French Provincial cabinet, so I'm really loving the glaze effect. Layering this glaze over the gold mutes the gold and makes it have less luster. You could either come back in with another coat if you want it to be punchier, or you could do the gold after this step. I'm enjoying the more subtle, subdued gold, so I'm leaving it. The step I was most afraid of was adding the glaze to the white paper on the front because I really love how it looks. I started by skirting around the issue and adding the glaze to the outer edges of the cabinet as well as the entire face. Before committing to the cabinet door front, I'm adding the glaze around the very edges of the drawer. I want the center of the paper to remain bright. Off camera, I did add some gold around the edges of each of these drawers. I had just enough of the glaze left over and nothing goes to waste around here, so I'm finishing the back of the cabinet by making it look like stained wood. I fully intended to put the original hardware back on, but I completely covered the holes and I have no clue where they are. This is one of my all too familiar happy accidents because now I get to use this pretty floral hardware I got from Earth and Tree Miniatures. I want all of the hardware to coordinate, including the two original knobs that go for the cabinet doors, so I'm cleaning these with rubbing alcohol. This will remove any oils, and then I added a coat of ultra matte clear so there's a little bit of texture for my rub and buff to stick to. I think the more subdued gold leaf rub and buff looks more expensive. I put the drawers in place and super glued the hardware to the front to make sure they're all in line. I used tiny studs that are meant as fingernail decor to cover the holes so it looks like these are attached with nails. I covered these with rub and buff as well so they match. I'll be keeping these 6 original knobs I didn't use in my stash. Before we roll the beauty shots, let's check out these miniatures Whitney LaBrie sent me. She sent this sweet little orange cat which is looking over its shoulder, which would be fun to add to a scene. Maybe I could create a bird bath for the cat to look at. I really love the shape of this porcelain vase and I've actually been making pottery myself. These are the very first pieces I ever made, so some of them are a bit wonky, so I do intend to get better at doing this, but in the future I will be making a video showing you how to make miniature pottery on a tiny wheel using air dry clay. I need some ideas for what to do with this awesome wooden house. I'm thinking maybe a haunted house for around Halloween time. Let me know what you guys think. The rooms are fairly big, so I'll be able to pack some detail into it. I'm loving these teeny tiny cookie cutters. I plan to use these to make a baking in progress Christmas scene on a cutting board so it looks like you're in the process of making cookies. Once I finally start my basement project, maybe I'll use this pipe and these faucets in it. I really love highly detailed miniatures like this. These are tiny brass watch face hands. Maybe I could spruce up a mass-produced miniature clock or make a new one of my own. And finally, I have this peekaboo bunny miniature kit that's in quarter scale. It comes with a teeny tiny terracotta pot. I imagine this is Easter themed, so maybe you'll see this spring. This is just the beginning of making over this tiny cabinet because I will be making over all of the dollhouse rooms inside with dollhouse furniture and accessories. Check out this video next to see tiny decor and furniture I've made in the past. Remember to check out Whitney LaBrie's eBay store, which I pinned in a comment below.